Welcome back to another show on the Inspire Health podcast. And we are continuing on with our series on creating a new earth, a collaborative mission. And today we brought in Dr. Amber Mele'ha Wolf. And Dr. Amber is an internationally known teacher, facilitator, author, recording artist, healing intuitive, and channel of the Pleadian star mothers. She is an international Kryon team member and a 10-year presenting partner of Lee Carroll. By accessing her awakened Lemurian Akash, she has created the growing community of the Lemurian Sisterhood with seminars online and in person around the world. Given the Lemurian name Mele'ha by Kryon in 2014, she continues to receive sacred assignments and directions from the Pleadian star mothers and from Kryon to honor and empower the sacred feminine. These divine directions led to her creation of the Lemurian Shamanism School, and specifically the Shamanic Teaching Wheel, a shaman school. As women have the tools, ability, and intuition to absorb and remember the knowledge of practical shamanism as taught by Mele'ha. She has been committed to transformational healing, spiritual growth, holistic health care, and education since 1982, and her mission is to assist you in your journey of personal empowerment and transformation. And we are very excited to have her on the show today. Thanks for joining us, Amber.
Thank you for having me. I was just thinking, the older you get, the longer it takes to read that stuff of someone else's. It's more than one breath.
Well, it's totally true. And yours could probably go on longer too. But I know whenever you hear somebody else reading your bio, you're kind of like, oh,
It's like,
cool. Wow. It's like, wow, that's been a while. There's all those things have been sort of
it's been a life.
We just had when we're doing, what's the date today? The 19th, I think. The episode that was just out was with
a couple of weeks ago, we aired the episode with Lee and Monica.
Right. So this will be, whether this one comes a couple of weeks after or wherever it is, but you do a lot of stuff with Lee and Monica as well, and you've been touring with those guys for quite some time and sharing your own messages along with the directions that Kryon's given you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you guys ended up connecting up.
Yeah. I moved to Colorado on my 40th birthday, and I was getting a divorce, and I was a single mother, starting life all over again. And I left an ashram, so I really wasn't looking for spiritual anything. And about 4 years later, I was poking around in a little used bookstore in the metaphysical section. And I looked up on the shelf, and there was this white book with a shiny binding. And I went to touch it, and it fell down onto my bare foot. Wah! It was Kryon Book 1. And, that was 1992 or 3, no internet, and no desire to meet this person or go to where they were, which was even difficult to find the name of the person who did this book. But Spirit had a plan, and he brought into my life a man named Sid Wolf, who moved to Colorado, to the little street that I lived on in this tiny town outside of Boulder. And he and his wife and family built a house, and he was a holistic practitioner. And we met each other at a little health fair in this tiny little town, and we'd heard about each other, but we didn't take the time to know each other. We were too busy. And when we met, we knew there was some big spark thing going on. But really deeper than that was he was a friend of Lee Carroll's, all the way from San Diego to this tiny little town. What are the chances? And not only that, Sid and his wife had moved from Baltimore to San Diego to be a part of the Lemurian Fellowship, an intentional spiritual community. I had never heard of Lemuria. I hadn't heard of Atlantis. Well, I think I'd heard of Atlantis because I'm from the East Coast, and that's sort of an East Coast, hot spot, the Bermuda Triangle and all that. But I had, whatever, that's nice. And then Sid started to tell me about it. And what got my attention was that the women were honored as integral in the society. They were the healers, the teachers, they were the spiritual leaders of the community. And having been raised Catholic, there was none of that. I was raised to be a wife and maybe a secretary, and or maybe, a hairdresser. And I'm very grateful for those people, but it wasn't me. But so here's this Lemuria thing, and I didn't get chills or, oh, I knew I was there or any of that stuff. But in 1998, Sid took me to Santa Fe to a Kryon Summer Light Conference to meet Lee. So by that time, I'd read several Kryon books, and I wasn't going to be a follower or anything. They were just beautiful because Kryon honors the human. And that was a first for me. At best, as a human, I might languish in purgatory, as a soul once this life was done. That was my training. So when I heard that, I was like, yeah, I'll have some of that, please. So when I met Lee, I had done what many of us do with someone who's in a place of what you call authority or wisdom. I never expected him to be so warm and funny and welcoming and kind. And he was all of those things. And approachable. He wasn't, like my entourage will keep you away from me. He's never been that in all the years that I've known him. So I went in to hear him channel that day with Sid, and I'd not heard that before. I didn't know anything about it except maybe from, who was that other one early on? I'm forgetting.
Like Jane
But anyway,
Roberts and Seth or
yes,
something.
Seth. That was the only one I'd heard, and I wasn't really a fan of that. So I'm sitting in the audience, just like expectantly. I didn't know what to expect though. And Lee says, I am Kryon of magnetic service from the great central sun, he used to say then. Greetings, dear one. And I started to sob. I mean, I just welled up, and it wasn't quiet either. And I was shocked, like, what is this? What is this? And Sid just put his arm around me and said, just take a breath, honey. You'll be okay. Just breathe. And really, I just kind of cried through the whole channel, however long that was. But later, what Lee said about it was that was the love wash. And it was. And I could feel that beautiful, unconditional energy of source, God, love, whatever. And that was the beginning of the Kool-Aid for me. I'll have more of that, please. But I didn't really pursue anything with Lee. But Sid had been a teacher with Lee of the Journey Home book, which is a wonderful book that really was what introduced me to Lee early on tape. Remember cassette tapes? And so I knew that story, and they needed a new producer because their producers left. Sid's wife and two of the other facilitators also left. So Lee asked me if I would produce and facilitate with it. And I said, well, of course I will. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, I've never done anything like this. I have no idea about it, but I've got Sid, so we'll figure it out. So I started to produce and join the faculty of the Journey Home workshop. And the rest of the time I did my practice, my holistic health practice, which was mostly cranial sacral therapy and quite a bit of body connection somatics. And then in 2010, I also began to host Lee once a year at what it used to be called the at-homes. And I don't know if Kryon or Lee talked about this when you interviewed him, but Lee used to do these little events at the homes of people where there would be like 8-10 people when he was first starting out 30 something years ago. And then it grew and grew. So it would be a full day at somebody's home. And then it got too big for that. So it wasn't called an at-home anymore, of course. And so I would bring him to Boulder, and I did that, I think, from maybe 2004 on. And in 2010, he asked me if I wanted to travel with him and teach and make his 1-day events that he was doing all over a 2-day event. And it was like, but yes. No, I didn't even skip a beat. And I don't know why he asked me, except that as the years unfolded, and I learned that we came from the same Pleiadian star mother, that our connection is very old and deep. And when Monica came into his life, and she actually lived with me in Colorado for 3 years. And so, as I said, we talk almost every day. We got to be really good friends. And I saw this old family, this old ancient connection. But what I also saw was the divine masculine is Lee in this case, and Sid for me, was creating and holding a sacred space so that I could step in to these teachings as they unfolded. And I'm an introvert. I never would have gone out into the world and done that. I was happy with my little one-on-one practice, even though I knew I would someday have women's circles. I didn't go beat the bushes for that. But Spirit, again, had a plan and brought it to me. So in Lee creating that space year after year, from 2010, in 2013, Sid transitioned, and it was as if he passed the baton to Lee, and I was already involved in that life. So I had a life beyond what my life was with Sid, which was very involved and very, in the health field and the metaphysical field. So that was really a gift, a real gift. And Lee in 2014 asked if I would like to have him come to the Lemurian Sisterhood meeting that I was doing in Boulder and channel Kryon. So just to back up a little bit, I started having women's meetings right away on the road with Lee, and there was no Lemurian Sisterhood. It was just women's meetings on Saturday evenings. And then in 2014, he asked about the channel. And again, I would never have approached him and said, hey, could you come and do a channel to these women? And I said, of course. Yes, of course. And it was that meeting in Boulder where he channeled to the Lemurian Sisterhood for the first time and then gave me my Lemurian name, Mele'ha. So it had been exactly 1 year to the day since Sid's passing. And, no mistakes with divine timing. It just is like that. And the Lemurian Sisterhood really blossomed from the point of 2012. But once he started doing those channels, there was a lot of history about Lemuria then. And really, people just loved hearing that. And all of those channels are on my website, amberwolf.com, free audio. And there's over 125, and he continues to do them today with my online events. And I'm very grateful for that. So there's also that. The last one was the equinox. So as the Lemurian Sisterhood grew in about 2018, we figured there needed to be a compilation of all of this information that was coming through Kryon during these meetings. And it wasn't just about the sisterhood, it was about the culture of the island. It was how we got there, how the Star Mothers got there, what the Star Mothers were doing, what was the Lemurian teaching wheel. And it was really time to get that into book form. So I was never going to do that. But Monica, who had already written 3 books, approached me with the idea of being the editor of all of those channels plus my experiences that got me to create this Lemurian sisterhood. And so the book Women of Lemuria came into being. And that was really such a gift. And I'm so grateful that she has that archival brain that can sift through all of the subject matter, because those channels wouldn't be that long, maybe 15 minutes, but Kryon could go through lots of different subjects, but she got them together, got the subjects together. And so we now have that. It's also an audiobook, it's also a Kindle book. And from there, all these other sacred assignments, which is what I learned to call them, appeared, or were kind of gently and insistently ushered into my life by Kryon. He would be doing channels on stage in front of this audience of women. And he would say, "So Mele'ha, where are the blank, blank, blank? Like, where are the songs of the sisterhood?" And I'd be like, "I don't know. Why are you asking me?" "Or where are the healing codes of the sisterhood?" "I don't know. Where are..." So from there, after he would embarrass me 2 or 3 times on stage, I would say to the Star Mothers, "Okay, I got it. There needs to be this." And I am more than willing to do whatever it is on the physical level that needs to happen, like recording things or art or any of that stuff. But I need information. And so it began. And that was, once the book had been created, that was a big deal. But in 2017, there were the Lemurian code cards that they wanted to have this awakening of information that specifically is stored in, they call them the star centers. We know them as chakras. And there are 11 different places on and around the body. And they wanted that because they said since 2012, there has been an asking. There's enough people that want to know about this energy, to find out about how it's happened in their life in the past and how it can possibly be helpful in the present, and what we're creating in the future. So that was when the cards started, and they were, I found an artist, and I got the information channeled from the Star Mothers as to what's to be on the cards and how to use them. And I thought that was that. And they came out in 2017. And as long ago as 2021, they were still giving what they call activations and different ways of going deeper into the Lemurian Akash and into getting the cells of the physical body to recognize this shift that we're in and how we can use what we knew then for the shift now, and again, to create a magnificent future.
Beautiful. There's so much there to unpack.
That was a beautiful story too. I love hearing the backstory of how people meet and where they started and where they are now too.
Women of Lemuria, I had that book, and it was one of the very few books that I chose to pack with us when we lived for a year in Mexico. And while we were there, I was in the middle of it, and a friend kept looking over my shoulder and wondering what I'm reading about, as I was sharing with her the chapter on our children and how we choose to actually guide and educate them. And I lent it to her and ended up leaving it, forgot about it in Mexico while we were packing. But I want to touch on that in a moment. But when you speak of Star Mothers, when you speak of Lemuria, these are terms that I hadn't really even heard much of until we started to speak with the Indigenous community within our episodes. And I realized that kind of understanding and knowing is very much a part of the culture of those who are well connected to our ancient past. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that, because then there's also, the seven sisters, which is often spoken of within the indigenous communities. But now there's the understanding that there's actually nine. And when we speak of that, we're actually referring to the star clusters through which the Pleiadians come to us from. But I wonder if you can get into it a little bit and speak a little bit more. What do you mean when you speak of star mothers, and how is the Lemurian, what is Lemuria, and how is that significant, and even at this time in history?
Okay.
Just a couple things. Just a couple things.
Yeah, just a couple. That's just easy enough. So Lemuria is where we have Hawaii now, and it was a continent, a mini continent that was created on a bubble of magma, because Hawaii is a seam volcano. The volcanoes are seam volcanoes. They're not the kind like Mount St. Helens that just blow their tops, or Mount Shasta that just, they leak lava. And when that happened over millennia of time, dust and seeds and all kinds of stuff, particles, would be carried there in the air and in the water, and vegetation started. Well, pretty soon it looked like a good nesting place, and et cetera, and et cetera. And if it's a good nesting place, well, there's eggs, there might be, seals or whales or whatever. So it became, in my belief, it became the metaphor for the Garden of Eden. And that's where we went with the creation story. We went back to the snake and, all of that instead of Kundalini. But we had, after, however long it takes for that evolution, and sometimes Kryon said that we will find evidence, but it's not going to be what we expect. But the reason we don't find evidence at the bottom of the ocean or anywhere from Lemuria is mostly it gets fried from lava. It all gets covered in lava. And, if you've ever seen that, it's, or it takes forever to grow stuff. It does grow stuff, and people build their houses on it. But it's not what we expect as archaeologically speaking. So what was the question? No, I'm kidding. So Lemuria existed. There was a population of people who had adapted to live there, to hunt, to fish, to heal, to educate themselves. They had a language. They were subsisting off the land. They lived in harmony with nature. They knew not to have too many kids. They wouldn't even be fertile, because their resources, they couldn't, there was nothing from the outside. And then the story is, if this is part of the Kool-Aid, that they were contacted by the Pleiadian star mothers, who, yes, there are 9, but we only ever saw 7 because we didn't have telescopes. They were always there. They're not new. The people were contacted by the Pleiadians, who came from an ascended planet. In other words, they did their work to integrate their shadow and learn about what it is to be and live a life of spiritual alignment. And as an ascended planet, and this is, in my understanding, what usually happens is you pay it forward. You go to another place that looks like a good place for that to happen. And so they came to Lemuria, and it was consensual. It wasn't just like one day a spaceship landed and, okay, here, now we are going to breed with you and, whatever. It was a consensual understanding that it was time for humanity to discover its divinity. Now, the seeds for all of this started 200,000 years before the actual beginning of that experiment, when the star mothers first came to the earth and they put the time capsules in the nodes of the earth, in the 12 nodes of the earth. And you could read all about that at kryon.com/nodes. And it's also in the book Women of Lemuria. So those nodes, those time capsules, as we think of time capsules, were kind of set to go off at a specific time. And the one that was most pertinent, of course, was Lemuria, because it was a place that was isolated. There was water all around it for thousands of miles and no reason for anyone to come there. People then didn't even think of other people existed unless they could find them by land. So here were the Star Mothers, and yes, they did come. They did take physical form so that they looked human and that they could reproduce with human males and have half divine Pleiadian Lemurian children. So that was the plan, was that the Pleiadian DNA would continue to be disseminated through the race. Now, if you think about 7 or 9 Star Mothers who came to Earth, and maybe they all got pregnant at the same time and they all had girls. I mean, this is like extreme. So 9 months later, because they did the normal physical human gestation and birth, 9 months later, there's 9 girls born because they could choose the sex. Those 9 girls have to grow up to be at least 13 years old to be ready to have children, to have a period, to have children. So you can see how long it might take over time to bring 350 million souls, which is what Kryon has said, that have come through Lemuria. A long time, thousands of years. And the Star Mothers could see that there would be a beginning and a middle and an end to this. And one of the things that they brought to Lemuria for a teaching apparatus, because it was an oral tradition then, was the teaching wheel, the Lemurian teaching wheel. And that was brought through by Kryon in 2017 when we had a return to Lemuria event on the Big Island where the node is. And that Kryon said that he could only bring that information through because of the women that were sitting on either side of Lee. And one was Kahuna Kale Eliyahi, who is now transitioned, and the other woman was me. So he brought through that teaching wheel, and we just kind of didn't do anything with it. He wasn't getting more than the original information. We did, I think, 3 different events with that, but it wasn't really giving us the juice. And then in 2019, he brought through another wheel, and he said that it wasn't Kryon that was bringing it through. It was the Star Mothers telling Kryon to tell Lee to tell me. So this is like telephone, right? The chain of events. And it's the shamanic teaching wheel. But just to back up for a minute to the Lemurian teaching wheel, all the people, men and women, children, went through the teachings of this wheel. It's a 5-spoke wheel, just like this. And the spokes have individual names, individual meanings. There's the children's side of the Lemurian teaching wheel, and then there's the graduate side, the adult side. And then that was when the men stopped going, whatever their age. And you didn't ever have to stop. It was school. So you could go as long as you wanted to. But when the women graduated or wanted to, they could go into the shamanic teaching wheel. And that is what the Star Mothers gave me in 2019, and really just came alive after COVID because we were traveling too much to do anything else. And the information just wasn't there. So with the shamanic teaching wheel for women, The spokes have a different name than the Lemurian teaching wheel. They all have different depths and different ways of bringing the information through for people. And what I found really fascinating was this shamanic teaching wheel is a lot like the indigenous wheel. And Jason, you did ask me about that in the beginning. It's just fascinating to me that we come from the stars are in so many indigenous cultures. As a matter of fact, I don't know one that doesn't say that. And when you especially go to the Pacific Islands from Hawaii down and then across to Rapa Nui, it's all that story. We come from the stars, from the star mothers. It's specific to Pleiades. So in the Lemurian teaching wheel, Kryon talks about stars and star steering because they would have to someday learn to navigate away from the sinking continent. So they learned that really early without learning why. Without, you're going to lose this place and you're going to be off in a canoe somewhere. We want you to be able to take care of yourself. But with the shamanic teaching wheel, the spokes were more indigenous sounding. There's earth, wind, fire, water, but there's culture. And also the hub of the wheel is very important in both wheels because that is creation. We come from the center, and that those hubs, the spokes reach out from the hub to a rim, and the rim is what ties us to our community. So on the rim lives all the people that we don't know yet, that we might know someday, that we do know, that are here to teach us things that we're here to teach. So I have felt this whole journey is just so blessed, and it is a sacred assignment for me to bring through the information in the shamanic teaching wheel. And when I was here too early, and I thought, okay, this must mean I have time for something. What is it? And I knew in a moment what it was, because we're planning on year 3 now of the shamanic teaching wheel, and the star mothers have been giving me crumbs, little crumbs. But last night, right before I fell asleep, they told me to be ready for the download today. So that's what I did in that hour, was all of that information and the way they want it structured in 6-month increments instead of 1-year increments. And so I just follow directions, really, and they are always there for me I can rely on that. In the beginning, I had a very linear mind about it. Like, I got to get this done. People need this. People are, they've already paid for this. I got to produce this. And I would get into a huge anxiety and put all this pressure on myself. I mean, I actually had high blood pressure. And then I realized, with the help of some friends watch me do this, that I am always there. They are always there for me. I am always there with the information. Spirit always has the perfect plan, and I can just relax and trust that, even when it's not anything that I expect. And so many times it's not. Most of the time it's not. I think we just based our expectations on what's happened to us in the past, or, what we might fantasize, or what we've read somewhere or someone said. But when it comes through as that beautiful, pure information that isn't tainted, I guess, by past experiences or biases or traumas or any of that. And really the only past experience it is influenced by is my Lemurian Akash, as my time being what Kryon said, I was the last priestess of Lemuria, meaning that it was time for the island to shift its shape. and I was the last one there teaching, and I stayed when most people left.
Ah,
And that's what could bring the teachings to the rest of the world. And, you know, a lot of us ended up in the Inquisition or in the Salem witch burning, but Kryon has also said a lot of the information went to the Masons, which I thought was really interesting. But it's always been inside of us. And so many people hear the call, and it's really interesting. They'll not know anything about it one day, and somebody will say something, they'll hear something, they'll see something about Lemuria, and they've got to know more. They knew they were there. They start to get chills. And it's just that, it's not just, but it's the Akash waking up and saying, okay, time, the switch has been flipped and it's time. So we find ourselves, since certainly the Great Shift in 2012, really opening to what that possibility, what do those teachings from then, how do they help us now? Because life was so different then. I mean, now I was in that hour and I never thought I'd ever say that, in that hour I was waiting to come on here, I was writing a document on my phone, dictating it on my phone in Google, whatever, Docs. And, you know, that's what we do now, but we didn't then. So how can that knowledge then help us now? Good question.
I think that is the big question, and it's super timely with this series on creating a new Earth, because it does feel like there can be benefits of looking at what has been, both to paint a direction as far as what we don't want to do, but also a template for what we could want to do. And then at the same point, I feel like there's this I keep feeling like we're pioneers in so many ways of sort of actually bringing forth something new that maybe is just new. Like that's, you know, maybe it was something from a long time ago that we've forgotten and we're sort of just reconnecting to, and then it's coming up as something new in this world at this time. But how are you finding that with as people are connecting to their Akash more and more?
and what is the Akash?
Yeah, so maybe we'll go into that. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what the Akash is, how we're setting the stage up to be able to connect more to that, and then the benefit of that.
Okay.
Again, just a couple.
Just go. So our Akash is a record of our soul's experience, all of our lifetimes, everything that's happened. And there is a fourth dimensional cave of creation where our Akashic record crystal lives. Everybody's got one. And when we are ready to come into a life, we pass through that cave of creation, and maybe we put our hand on the crystal and say, give me a really good memory of all the languages I ever spoke, because I want to be really good at languages in this next life, or whatever, you know, I want to be a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. I think more, it would be more of the things that will help us live in a culture. So whatever, you know, I want to remember the life when I was really compassionate. And then we go have our life. And when the vessel is used up and our soul comes back through the cave of creation, we pass by that crystal again and leave the attributes that we've collected in that life. And there they sit. And maybe some of them go to the hospital while our soul waits until there's another time. So there's a record in that crystal of all of the events that you've ever experienced, all of the things that you wish you could forget, or the things that were wonderful, like your children, or, you know, wonderful friends and family, or trips, or what you've learned. So when we were in Lemuria, we hadn't had that yet. Lemuria was the beginning of our Akash. That's not to say that we didn't have an understanding of creation, let's say, before the Star Mothers came, because we live by the seasons, by the moons, with nature. So we understood that. But once the Star Mothers connected us with the divinity part, then we were able to really look at how we can create what's next. And that's what we have now. We may not have a memory of what we did or how we did in the past, although, there are many of us who, you resonate with a certain place or certain kinds of people, or there's certain kinds of people you can't get away from. So you probably had a life with them. And, spirit just brings certain things into your life that you've done before, and you have deja vu, and you have all of that to let you know that this is a real thing. So if you know that, and you know that you have the power to create in the now what it is that will be helpful to the earth and to our future, then for me, you have a responsibility. And it's not up to other people, it's up to every one person, who has the wherewithal to do better, to know better and do better, as Maya Angelou has so eloquently said. When you know better, you do better. And that is what changes the world. Now, some people don't know better, so they don't do better. But what we do know now is that as a collective, and this is one of the biggest things from our life in Lemuria, is that it was a community life. And we don't do that now. We really rarely do community. And I'm not saying there aren't any, but we don't live in communities. We have mass transportation and mass communication. So mass food production, we don't need that. And so we moved away from that to the glamorous life of not in community. But when we had that community energy, here's a good example. I was teaching yoga the other day, and there's a yoga teacher who was in the Azores, and she's my age. And she took a really bad fall on one of her artificial hips, which did not break, but it hurt her back a lot. So she couldn't come back and teach yoga in the fall. So I've been teaching a class for me and a class for her. And we put her in the center of the circle during our first yoga class a week ago Tuesday. And I had lunch with her that Thursday, and she was limping. And then we put her in the center of the circle. And we all sent her energy with oming. And I saw her a few days later because we swim together, and she said, I think I'm going to come back to the teaching in the middle of November. And she wasn't going to come till next year. And I said, are you sure? And she said, I suddenly am just feeling so much better. And I can't prove it scientifically, but, here especially were people that knew her directly, purposefully directing their loving, compassionate energy to her body. And a couple days later, there was a shift. It was just, and that's what we do as a community. That's why we're here now. That's what we bring from then to now. How do we? Kryon just asked people to do a 4-minute meditation. Someone is going to put that together, he said, in his Disabling the Darkness. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, he released that a couple days ago. It's on YouTube and Facebook. He asked people to do a 4-minute meditation for disabling the darkness and bringing in the light. And he said someone will put that together. So he didn't say he was going to do it. And I kind of checked in, and it's not me. So we'll see who that is. But that's what we're doing as a community, is bringing the energy that we know exists, that we know from quantum physics, because we've been talking about quantum physics for some time now. We know that if we know from Isaru Emoto that energy can change the molecular structure of water. We know that sitting in the place we don't like will make us feel weird because it's an energy thing there. So we can, as a community, use that energy to create a change. And really, honestly, that's what we have to do. It's not a want to anymore. It's not a little experiment. It's what we have to do.
You had spoken of 200,000 years ago. This is earlier on when you were speaking. Greg Braden, one of the scientists in this day and age, who also has a Native American heritage as well, he had written a book that he had put out called Human by Design, which he spoke specifically of a divine intervention of sorts about 200,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Are we speaking about the same thing? Are we speaking of the Lemurian star mothers stepping in and bringing?
Well, here's the thing. And I really love Greg, and I also hosted him many times in Boulder along with Lee. So we got to be very good friends. That book was written as part of his contract from Hay House, and they made him change the title when they reissued it. It's not called Human by Design anymore. So if you happen to have one of those copies, it's a collector. But yes, I mean, he said it without saying it, because that's what he has to do as a scientist. And I'm happy for that, because I don't feel like he's avoiding anything or discounting anything. What he's doing is getting another big audience to look at the same thing we're looking at. That, yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen. Well, okay, yes, evolution happens, but there are lots of things that create evolution. And physical evolution is one thing, spiritual evolution is another thing. So when we see, the first time I went to Stonehenge, and, those big sacred circles, which are not that old, compared to what we're talking about with, 50,000, 26,000, Stonehenge is like 5,000. So, but you see that people didn't do that because they were going to plant stuff there. They did that because they had a spiritual connection to something, and they believed in that. So that intervention it's been with us. It's just been with us. It had to go underground for a long time. And, there were places where the Romans and the Catholics and the Crusaders weren't. And so they could continue to practice that. But then there were places where, it wasn't so pretty.
We've spoken also with Huna Flash. He goes by Huna Flash, but he is what he calls a Lemurian light shaman, originally from New Zealand. He's a Maori, and he also works with and teaches a lot of the indigenous communities throughout North America as well. We had connected with him. We've taken courses with him to better understand what it is that he's bringing forth. He's spoken of Lemuria. He has spoken of Lemuria 1 in Hawaii, but not only that, but also, like, he's basically saying Lemuria has shown up many times, multiple times, numerous times, and now he's actually calling forth and saying that we have arrived in order to usher in order to help us remember the possibility of tapping into Lemuria 5, which is what he says is the current age that we're stepping into.
Like the fifth dimension.
Right, exactly. So would you be able to elaborate on that? Have there been different civilizations of Lemuria, maybe even moving throughout the world? aside from just the island of Hawaii?
Okay, so it's my feeling that Lemuria 1, let's just say it like that, is what I was a part of. And we do know that there's a jet stream that takes you south to the Maori land. And we do know that when Kryon and I were in New Zealand, he was very clear about saying you were Lemurian before you were Maori. And the same in Rapa Nui, and the same in Mount Shasta, and the same in the Azores. So yes, throughout the world. Mm. And the coast of Chile is another definite place there. And that it's not the kind of thing where you can ever be all or nothing. You can't say it was here and only here, and this was taught and only that. I think there are a lot of different stories because there were, like I said, 350 million people, souls that came through Lemuria 1. And those people went somewhere. And they had experiences and they have memories, because over that 350 million people incarnating, there were a lot of years, and a lot changed in the world, but also on that continent. A lot changed. I mean, you can imagine how much we know how much things change in a year. And look at 20,000, 26,000 with a wobble of the earth that Greg talks about. If people are having unique and different memories to mine or Kryon, why wouldn't they? And there are so many people that are creating light language codes and all kinds of sounds and channeling different art, and there's all kinds of cards, because we've all have different experience of it, and we all have a human filter as well as a divine filter. So why wouldn't it, I guess, would be my answer to that. And I do feel like the Star Mothers have been saying to me for a long time, what we're now in is the new Lemuria, or the next Lemuria. We're not in that. We can't be in that. It's gone. We're in this. Like I said earlier, I'm from the East Coast, and everyone there likes to hang on to everything, let it get old and never change. And, the furniture is passed down, and the traditions are passed down, and the beliefs are passed down, and nothing changes. Some of that's good. It's nice. But we also know that we have to change. I mean, you can't keep one thing the same and then introduce the internet and not expect that one thing not to change. So as our idea of Lemuria morphs and is created, for me, first there was the Lemurian Brotherhood that was in the 70s, I think, and 80s, and I learned about it in the 90s. And then the Lemurian Sisterhood and Kryon, and then there was the Lemurian teaching wheel, then the Shamanic teaching wheel. Who knows? We don't know. We just know that we are moving in the direction of higher consciousness, the new humanity. I'm happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. So when we're speaking of Lemuria, we're speaking of our past that is connected to the Pleadians, the Pleiadians being off-world beings who were of higher consciousness, higher frequency, and that's why they're referred to as, when you spoke of as saying half divine, it's essentially they're of higher frequency. So for them to have come in, and what Greg Braden was speaking of, the divine intervention, is essentially they assisted humanity in being able to catapult us to a higher frequency in order to land that here on the planet. Have there been, who else is here? What else? Because
I think that depends on who you ask.
Mhm.
And, there are, I encounter people who say, well, I'm not from Lemuria, I'm from Sirius, or I'm from Orion, or I'm from Arcturus, or I'm from, great. I mean, I had no idea about Lemuria for the longest time, and they have, like this much more expand. Well, I was there, and then it was another galaxy and another universe. I think that, I mean, once we understood that we're not alone, then you can really make a big leap to anything is possible. I don't think that we can, and we can't put a limit on who might be here or where they might be from. And honestly, there are a lot of us that might not even know that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I didn't
Well,
know.
the more I hear it, I think we're likely just a really big melting pot of all sorts
Yeah,
of different things.
yeah,
One thing I'm really curious about, Amber, is the work you do with the divine feminine, and because it feels to me like if we can all connect into what it means to be divine feminine, what it means to be divine masculine, we'll likely be in a place where we then actually can bring forth something that's going to be likely a
yeah,
lot better than what we've done in the past, because we're kind of connecting to these almost these powerful archetypes that I think hold a
yeah,
specific vibration in themselves. I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective. What does that mean to
yeah.
really honor and embody the divine feminine as well as the divine masculine? And is it just for women or just for men? And maybe that's sort of a discussion a bit.
Yeah, that's a great discussion. And I can start by saying that I took a lot of heat in the beginning because my meetings were only for women. And the men were like, well, what about us? Where's the Lemurian Brotherhood? And I said, well, I'm not a guy. But what I started when the Star Mother started feeding me the information about the balance, because that's the whole thing. We're not in balance in this world. We are way out of balance. And we've gone way to the masculine, way to the whatever shadow comes from that side of the masculine. Not that there isn't a light side, because here you are, but that's a powerful, powerful force, and it overtook our world for thousands of years. And we've got to get back to the balance, to the harmony. And when I talked to Greg Braden about balance, he said, where balance is like this, it's never right here. It's always like this. And he said, harmony is a better word. So I try to go there. So the Lemurian sisterhood was what was introduced to me because so many women in so many cultures, I'm not just like American white women, cultures are taken from a place of equality and made lesser than. That we're always looking up to another authority. We're looking to a man for our value. I mean, that's how I was raised. I was raised to be a wife. And it took me a long time to see, a few tries, to see that that wasn't all there was for me. And not that I didn't want that. I did want that, but it wasn't just that. And so women have a stigma, we have a trauma, we have abuse, we have all kinds of things that are just, we're just even really beginning to understand that and how that has shaped our history. Now, were we victims? Yes, we were victims. Now that we know that, what do? We don't stay in the victim place. We're responsible for understanding that that happened. However, we brought it in, called it in, wanted to experience it, I don't know. I think that's unique to each person. But we are responsible for shifting the energy, healing it, getting out of it, dragging other people with you, or giving them an opportunity to see that there is another way to be. And part of the divine feminine, and this is something Kryon said from the very beginning in honoring the human, and then the shamanic part, the women were the shaman because they were the ones that had the intuition. They were the ones with the creative life force inside that create beings, but also create ideas. And the men were the creators of sacred space. They were the builders, they were the fishermen, and they were the cooks. God bless them, they were the cooks. And we love that, don't we? So it was a really good balance. It was a really good balance. It wasn't like women are weak, so they can't lift this thing up. They'd figure out how to do it. It may take more of them or whatever. No, women had their thing to do, which was bring in the spiritual framework, the template for humanity to begin to build off of. And the men could supply them with what they needed, like a safe, sacred space, a safe space that they could unfold their wisdom into. So it was really necessary. And sure, the men would build the trails and light them and maybe scatter herbs at the feet of the women if they were going to a sacred ceremony, melt into the jungle and keep an eye out on things, on the women at night. And they would build the buildings, and they would teach the children who were young, the young boys. They would have their own teaching wheel so that the boys could learn how to do their part to take care of a balance, to create a balanced society. So it's not that it's all about women only. And I think that a lot of men thought that in the beginning. And they were disgruntled. So what the Star Mothers said to me was, have them do something together. And what I used to do in these huge auditoriums with a couple hundred people with movable chairs is they were always set up, in linear form, because that's what men do. And when I would have my sacred circle at night, we'd make sort of a horseshoe. And there were many times I'd be muscling those chairs around by myself while people were at dinner, because that was that time. I asked from the stage for a few men to stay and help me do that. I had so many guys there. It was just amazing. And I made a big ceremony, not a big ceremony, but I made a purposeful ceremony. I would have them hold hands. We'd stand by the altar. I'd say a little prayer about how necessary their energy is, and, on and on. And they would, sometimes they wouldn't say a word. They just, is this how you want it right here? And then they'd go. And I would say to them, while the women are in here, I'd appreciate it if you just, keep in your mind or in your heart a thought for what's going on in here. And they loved that because they were part of it, just like they were in Lemuria. And that's really missing. That's really missing now in our world.
It's interesting you were speaking of, as far as women choosing that wife role or the inferior role. We've gone to such extremes with things, and as far as, I guess, even when in the attempt to find balance, we've explored so many different extreme ends of things where women have gone from that end to becoming more manly, like taking on the male roles. And it's been such an exploration, I think, as we figure out, when we wrestle with this question of who am I, what am I? I mean, it's been such a journey these past few years specifically, because I feel like more so than anything, we've felt more validated in even bringing these questions up to the surface to explore more deeply and more intimately and with greater curiosity and a sense of wonder, like, what is it all about? But it's because I feel like the answers are different based on who you are. And so it really is this individual excavation that takes place, and hence the importance of spending time alone and listening to your own inner voice and inner guidance, because it is an individual journey. And I feel like an individual journey that ultimately points us all to the oneness that we are all a part of. But within that, it's almost like when you're polishing a gem and there's different angles and cuts to that gem, and you want to kind of get to know all those different angles and pieces and bits of who you are, because it is that sparkle that makes the whole that much more beautiful.
That's
And
a
I feel
beautiful
like
analogy. I love it.
in this time of when we're told to, wear a mask and become the same and blend in and not step out of line and not speak up, I feel like the most rebellious thing that one can do, and you might not even
courageous,
and
I would say.
absolutely, is to actually start to explore who you are and what you are and what speaks to you, and what is it that calls to you, what is it that you're longing for. We've spoken of faith and trust a lot within the metaphysical conversations that we've had with various teachers and speakers. And even when you're speaking of how you have opened up to, okay, I'm an hour early for an interview that I thought was going to start at this time, so now I have an hour window. What am I here for? That trust and faith shows up on a moment to moment basis, because you come to the recognition that nothing is an accident, that there is a force assisting with the orchestration of everything. And so tuning into that inner guidance and letting that be our guiding light, I feel is so imperative right now. Hence this book. Tell us. So I not accidentally, came across this series a few years ago as I was researching a particular guest, which we never got to speak with, because what he was bringing forth and the books that he had asked me to specifically read was way too intellectual, and I could never get into it. So I couldn't even speak of it if I couldn't wrap my head around it. But what he did recommend to me was these books as well. And I ordered the first one, and I spent a lot of time in the bathroom, I think. we have a few kids, so I spent
that's the quiet time, is alone in the washroom.
The quiet zone.
When the door gets locked for a while.
And I couldn't put it down, and it felt like it was speaking to me on such a deep level, and I was resonating with it. And it was almost reading some things that were familiar, but how could it be? It's like, it's not me and who I thought the physicality of me is within this lifetime. So it started then I started to dive deeper and deeper into it. And the telos is, if you're familiar with it, I'd love to hear what you would speak of.
Is that Aurelia Louise Jones' book?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. And she shared the stage with Kryon many, many years ago in Mount Shasta. Yeah, it's very beautiful. He really honored her. Yeah. Mount Shasta and that energy. As you were speaking, I was seeing myself the first time I was actually on the mountain, not just looking at the mountain. That was the first work that I did with Lee. We went to Mount Shasta, of all places, but we never got on the mountain. He didn't care about hiking, and we would, come in on Friday and leave on Monday. And we did that twice a year apart. And the third time we went for a conference, and I said, I am going on that mountain. And I found a guide who is a very good friend today. And it was a hot summer day, and I took my shoes off, and I just felt like I was melting into the earth there, and that there were the trees are magnificent, just receiving my spirit. And I said to the woman I was with and the guide, I'm going to spend the night here. I was totally like going to do that. I had a t-shirt and shorts on and not even a water bottle. I'll be fine. I was convinced that this mountain would take care of me. And it was probably going to be 40 that night, but I was such in that zone of the energy of that place. And so in prior in times post that, Andrew Oser, the guide, and I did a couple of workshops together and went on the mountain. And I did some channeling up there in Anumar's garden, which is something she'll probably mention in there, where her interdimensional lover came through to her. I don't know what book that is, but it's like riding a rocket ship when I do channeling up there. And I have to sit on the ground. There's no leaning, standing, nothing. Not even, I don't even sit on a rock. It has to be on the dirt. And then just don't talk to me for like 30 minutes because it's so powerful. So I have never seen any beings up there. I have never seen any lights. I don't know about the city inside. That is not any of my experience. But a lot of people, that is their experience. And certainly Aurelia Louise Jones has had a incredibly detailed and deep experience with that energy. I feel it when I have a Skype with my friend who's the guide, because I know where his desk is in his house and he looks out at the mountain when he's working on the computer and I'm there. So there's something that is so deep and so profound that I don't have words really for it. I've given you my experience, but yeah.
I did want to ask if it's okay. Kids, I love to bring the kids into the conversation because there's so many changes taking place right now. And I feel like a lot of the kids who are coming in now, it's not that they're not doing well within the school system. I feel like they're system busters. So I feel like they're actually here to just do away with anything that is not working and is not in the highest good of where it is that we're moving to. And so with the falling apart of the school systems as we currently see them, there was a section within the Women of Lemuria where Kryon did speak of what the future of the education system could look like. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit on that, because he even said that it's not necessarily even something that would be favored or admired or encouraged by people at the time. Right. Only when those children grew older and the success or the ways in which their education would deem to be useful and beneficial would only be recognized when they were older, functioning within society, and what sort of individuals they would have become.
Yeah, when they'll be saving the mess we've made of the world. Yeah, no doubt the educational system is broken. No doubt about that. I know that the souls that are here to recreate that system have chosen their mission. And just like us who have been on the front of the wave all of our lives, and I know you have too, it's not a comfortable place. It's not the vacation life. It's the system buster's life. But it's a purposeful life. And that's what an evolving consciousness, an evolving planet has to have, or we don't exist anymore. We go into the sixth extinction. Well, that's what's coming next. And the children that are the indigos or the star seeds of these days are strong and smart, and they're picking their parents, and they're finding people who will support them in being different. Because I don't know about you, but I couldn't do that. You know, my child is an honor child kind of bumper sticker thing, you know, when I was in school. And this is the only way a square looks, and this, you know, we have that. So as we move away from that, I mean, we have a whole wave of autistic, we're going to call them something different, because we've had to readjust our system for these children, whatever level they're functioning at. We've even given them levels because we don't know what to do with them. But they're teaching us that we're not all the same, that we're never going to be the same, that we have sensitivities and gifts, and we have these amazing abilities that have been drugged out of us or shamed out of us or guilted out of us or not even looked for, not even purposefully ignored, just not even looked for. Like, this is the best way to contain this energy, put it in a box and make it all behave the same. But why do we want to do that? Why don't we want to just throw it out and let it make a big, glorious mess and see who loves what about it? It's so subjective. And we really are, the children now, bless them for saying yes to this mission, because they're going to, I mean, not only, like I said, are they going to have to clean up our mess, they are forging a new way. And whatever we can do to love them, hold them in very high esteem, be compassionate for them, hold them when they are in a place of breakdown, because they are breaking down a system. Why wouldn't it break them down? And that they are, you know, they're so courageous, and I so admire them. I have a son who's older, he's 37 now, but we had a really hard time in school because these things just don't make sense to me, Mom. And it's not that he's not smart. He's really smart, but he was smarter than the box they were trying to put him in. And it wasn't extreme. It was just, you know, like not that happy. It wasn't a fun time for him. But now that he's in the business world, his mind gets to, you know, do all kinds of things. And he gets so excited about it because he has something to connect to. But in school, the way it is now, we don't. So I'm afraid it's not a peaceful revolution or evolution in many ways, because of the children who are ostracized for being different. And they're the hurricanes at the front edge of the wave that are going to make a difference. And I hold them in the highest regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, they're stirring up a lot of stuff for parents though too, which
Oh yeah.
you know, one of the areas I'll see a lot clinically is areas in mental health. And so I see a lot of times parents coming in with kids that have anxiety or ADHD or any of these labels that get put on them. And
oftentimes I think these labels get reinforced because
Oh yeah.
you can get funding from the government to come in with that sort of label. So it's
a whole system. And for the most part, I say just throw the labels out. And a lot of times the conversation eventually comes into, I mean, it's like, you know, support the child as much as you can support the child to allow their full potential to be expressed and foster an environment for that. But so much of that is then, you know, it's causes a whole bunch of changes in a lot of ways, because a lot of times the parents also have to make substantial changes in their own life to create that environment for them. So they're kind of like a catalyst for change in a lot of different ways. It's sort of like, it's not just a problem here. There's, you know, maybe the system doesn't work for you, and maybe the dynamic that's going on is not the optimal dynamic. And it's sort of forcing things to have to shift in structure around just how we parent, how we live our lives, where we focus our time, systems that maybe don't support things in the best way that they could be. So it's definitely a necessity, I think, but I agree with you. They kind of came in with I mean, some of these kids I think are so courageous to be able to come
Yeah.
in to stir the pot up like this. But
A full charge for change. I
yeah,
have I'll tell you this brief little story because it was so, it's still with me after I was a cranial sacral therapist for many years. I've done way over 5,000 sessions. I stopped counting. But I had a famous doctor and his wife and their young child as patients. And he was quite arrogant. And the child was very unadjusted. And the mother didn't know what to do. So the father put all the pressure on the wife, the mother, to make the kid, get normal. He wasn't normal. And he wasn't, he was brilliant. But the father was just seeing misbehaving and acting out because of this whole dynamic. And the mother finally came to see me with the kid. Fix the kid, please. I heard you could, whatever, do miracles. And so, and he was going around the massage table like this, touching everything. Everything was all over the place. And she would be yelling at him. And I said, look, why don't you get on the table? Let's let you get on the table. And as soon as I started to work on her, he came over and he looked, just stared like he was in another, connecting from another zone, just stared at her side of her head. And then he took a really deep breath and he just laid down on the floor and went to sleep. And she did this beautiful unwinding. And when he got up, he was just so not placid, because he was just so like lit from inside, because she finally let go of the whole baggage about, there's something wrong with him. And so without that kind of support for our children, we have labels and drugs and, government funding.
yeah, that's a
Mona.
beautiful story, Amber. I can totally agree that I've seen the same thing happen too.
Yes, I'm sure you have.
And a
Yeah.
lot of times, even if we're looking at different types of modalities like homeopathy or something, a lot of times the parent's the one that actually needs the remedy, and you treat the
Yeah.
parent, and then the child actually starts to improve. Or even if I'm looking for biochemistry, I'll often find certain patterns that are actually in the parents as well as the child, or like there's so many different dynamics. You can't separate it. It's
Yes.
it starts off particularly with the mom, starts off with this physical, direct physical connection, which really becomes this psychological connection
Yeah.
and sort of field connection that carries on. So
We're entangled.
yeah.
We're all entangled.
Mhm.
And when you create a being in your body, you're really entangled.
Mhm.
Dr. Amber, thank you so much for all of the time here.
Oh,
That was
yeah, it's
beautiful.
been
Yeah, I think that
lovely.
was a beautiful conversation. Do you have any final words
Mm,
for people at this time in the concept of creating a new earth, a collaborative mission, and what people can do
mm.
at this point?
Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. I've loved my time with you. This is the new earth, the new humanity, the new consciousness, the new Lemuria, whatever you want to call it. It's obvious that it's not the same as it was, and that it is moving in a new direction. Now, most of us want it to go in a really great direction, but not everybody. There are people who would like to see the things, the shadows that are going on in the world. And so my my feeling about where we are the most powerful is, first of all, in ourself, and not holding that place of fear, recognizing that it's there and saying, yeah, I know you're here, and you're really here for a good reason, because it is a mess out there. But how about this? Let's go for a walk and really enjoy being in nature. Or let's call somebody and say, can we just breathe together for a minute? I miss you. Or let's create an intentional community where we can support each other and let's have a meetup and talk about, or let's meditate, or let's get on a Zoom meeting, or we have so many options now for bringing in the light and sharing our own light, being supported when we don't feel that light. It wasn't long ago that I got on my regular Wednesday meeting with my team, and I said, I'm just not inspired. And I didn't want to tell you guys because I thought you would think I was a failure. And I know these people well enough that I could just say that. And they said, and first of all, they didn't try to talk me out of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's one really good psychological thing, is don't try to talk people out of their fear. Be compassionate and know that you got that too. And really find a place where you can move through it and see it for what it is. Yeah, that could happen, but so could this. And we know what we focus on expands. So let's get entangled with people and places and things that expand the consciousness of light and the new humanity and the new Lemuria.
I love that. I love the message of don't try to talk people out of their fear. I actually find when you try to, it usually just pisses people off anyways, because there's just this feeling that needs to be felt too. We're not talking about ruminating in something for weeks and weeks and weeks, but just having an organic experience with what's coming up and just letting that be. It says one of the people we really enjoy listening to, Jacqueline, and she'll say non-interference, like just allow things to be. Don't touch them too much, but you don't have to try to make it better. We're kind of in we're in this idea of we always have to try to make the bright side of everything, but sometimes
fix it. Let's fix it.
And doesn't let us just organically maybe arrive there by processing through what needs to be processed.
Such a good point. And it does organically arrive there. But when you try to take away what we're invested in, whether or not it's fear or light, we resist that. So we're going to have more of that, and it's going to continue. I was chatting with a friend yesterday I haven't talked to in a couple of weeks, and she said, I'm so afraid that we're going to have World War III. And my immediate response was just this dread inside, and I wanted to say to her, don't focus on that. But I didn't, because it's a real fear for her. And so it's going to happen. It happens in us, and it's going to happen outside of us. And really, when we can hold a space for the fear to just be the fear, what happens? It dissipates. It doesn't get our energy. It can't be that vampire. So it's a brave new world, folks.
With that, any forthcoming messages that the Pleadians have brought forth through you with regards to
the brave new world?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what I have been speaking are all of their thoughts and feelings. I find these days that there's such a meld between me and them. I don't have to go, okay, now I'm going to channel. But really their deepest desire and delight and celebration is us discovering our own value as beings of light, as these beautiful lighthouses on the earth that are shining so that we can find each other in the dark, and that we need to just keep doing that, whatever that looks like. And it's going to look different for everyone. And as we continue to do it, if you just light one match in a dark room, it brings light. And if you light two, it's really light. So as we find that light inside of us, and we do whatever work needs to be done to uncover it, and we have lifetimes of covering it. So as we uncover it, we are more and more resonating, not only with others who are uncovering their lights, but of the beings that we came here to be, and the things that we came here to do. So that's our work and our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Amber, where can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah,
That you've
just
got
my
going?
name, amberwolfphd.com. Yeah, you can look me up on my website, on my Facebook pages. I'm all over the place. And I would
Any
love to hear
events?
from you.
Any events coming up in November?
Yeah, I'm having a Halloween Samhain. The Star Mothers advised me to celebrate more. So I used to just do the equinoxes and the solstice, but now I'm doing the in-betweens. And so we'll have a dimensional doorway on October 31st, 5 p.m. Pacific time. You can find that in my events on my website. And I'm also having a live in person on 11/11 here in beautiful, sunny, warm Tucson for those of you who are in the winter and would like to get away. It'll be a one-day event here, and information about that is also on my website.
Wonderful.
Super. We will have
for
links to
asking.
that in the show notes. And other than that,
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Such a pleasure.
thank you so
Oh,
much.
you
Amber.
people, you're just darling. Thank you so much for asking me. And I want to know more about you. I'm going to start a podcast. So I would love to have you be guests on my podcast.
We'd be
We
honored.
look forward to that.